My father looked me in the eye and called me just a glorified temp worker after I'd spent 15 years building his company from the ground up while my useless golden child brother got handed everything on a silver platter. I just saved a $2 million contract that my brother had nearly destroyed, worked through 3 consecutive weekends to fix his mistakes, and sacrificed my own opportunities to keep the family business afloat. The betrayal cut deeper because it happened right after I'd pulled off another miracle. Our biggest client was ready to walk away because my brother had missed every deadline, ignored their specifications, and then had the audacity to blame them for unrealistic expectations. I'd spent 72 hours straight rebuilding their trust, personally redesigning their entire project, and convincing them we were worth a second chance. My brother was lounging in his executive chair, the one he'd never earned, smirking like he'd just delivered the punchline of the century. "Maybe now you'll understand your place in the family hierarchy," he said, clearly enjoying every second of my humiliation. Dad nodded approvingly, like watching his competent son get crushed was exactly the entertainment he'd been hoping for. But here's what they didn't know: I'd been documenting everything. Every contract I'd saved, every client relationship I'd built, every mess I'd cleaned up behind the golden child who couldn't organize a paper bag, let alone run a multi-million-dollar company. I had 15 years of proof showing exactly what kept their business breathing. I calmly packed my Employee of the Quarter plaques into a box, placed the latest one on my brother's desk, and submitted my 2 weeks' notice. They thought they were getting rid of dead weight. They had no idea they'd just fired the only person keeping their empire from collapsing, and I was about to watch it all burn down without me there to put out the fires. Let me explain how I became the family scapegoat while my brother earned the title of Golden Child through sheer genetic luck. From the day he was born, everything he touched turned to gold in my father's eyes, while everything I accomplished was just expected or not good enough yet. My brother coasted through college on gentleman's C's while I graduated summa cum laude with a business degree. He partied his way through fraternity life while I was already working internships and building the skills that would eventually save Dad's company. But when we both joined the family business, guess who got the corner office and the executive title? My brother was the golden child who could do no wrong even when he was doing everything wrong. While he was learning how to delegate his responsibilities to other people, I was learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. I handled our most difficult clients because I was the only one with the patience and competence to manage their demands. I salvaged projects that should have been complete disasters. I built relationships with suppliers, contractors, and partners that kept our costs down and our quality up. Over 15 years, I'd personally saved or generated over $8 million in revenue for the company. I'd prevented at least 12 major contract cancellations through relationship management and crisis intervention. I knew every client's preferences, every supplier's quirks, and every employee's strengths, because I actually paid attention to the business instead of just collecting a paycheck. I was the one keeping Dad's company afloat while my brother collected the credit. But the most insulting part was Dad's constant refrain whenever I asked about my future in the company: "You'll get something after I'm gone." Always vague, always conditional, always dependent on his death rather than my merit. Meanwhile, my brother was already being introduced as the future of the company at industry events. Those promises felt more and more hollow every time I watched my brother get promoted for work I'd actually done. Every time a client specifically requested me, but the contract got signed in my brother's name. Every time Dad bragged about his executive son while introducing me as my other boy who helps out around here. "You'll get something after I'm gone," he'd always say, like 15 years of building his empire was worth some leftover scraps from his will. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in March, right after I'd spent the entire weekend saving the Morrison account. My brother had promised them a complete project redesign in 2 weeks, something that normally takes 6, without consulting anyone about feasibility. When Morrison threatened to pull their $2 million contract, guess who got the emergency call? I worked 72 hours straight, redesigned their entire system, and personally presented the solution that saved the deal. Morrison was so impressed they signed a 3-year extension on the spot. He called me a glorified temp worker after 15 years of saving his company. But instead of gratitude, Dad looked at me like I'd just tracked mud through his pristine office. "You know what your problem is. he said, leaning back in his chair with that familiar look of disappointment. You think you're indispensable here. You're just a glorified temp worker who got lucky with timing. The words hit me like a physical blow. 15 years, 8 million in saved revenue, countless weekends sacrificed, and this was his assessment of my worth. Maybe now you'll understand your place, my brother added from his executive chair, that smug grin spreading across his face like he'd just delivered the ultimate truth bomb. He was clearly enjoying every second of this humiliation, savoring his moment of perceived superiority over the sibling who'd been cleaning up his messes for over a decade. My brother smiled like he'd won the lottery while watching my 15 years of work get dismissed as luck. That's when the fog lifted. I stood up, walked to my desk, and started packing. 15 years of awards commendations and client thank you letters went into a cardboard box. Then I took my latest Employee of the Quarter plaque and placed it on my brother's desk like a farewell gift. 2 weeks' notice, I said quietly, handing Dad my resignation letter. That's more courtesy than this situation deserves. 2 weeks' notice was more courtesy than they deserved after calling me a glorified temp worker. The family's reaction to my resignation was exactly what I'd expected. Complete dismissal mixed with arrogant confidence that they'd be better off without me. Dad barely looked up from his paperwork when I submitted my letter, waving it off like I was some disgruntled intern instead of the person who'd been holding his company together for 15 years. Good riddance, he said, not even bothering to read the details. Now we can really grow without someone constantly questioning our decisions. Your brother's got fresh ideas that aren't stuck in the past. My brother was practically glowing with excitement, already planning how he'd revolutionize operations without my interference. Good riddance, Dad said. Now we can really grow without your constant interference. While they were celebrating my departure, the job market was celebrating my availability. Within 3 days, I had 5 interviews scheduled. Within a week, I had 3 offers. My reputation in the industry was apparently worth a lot more than my family's estimation of my value. The offer I accepted came from Morrison Industries, the same client I'd saved just weeks before my resignation. Their CEO had been so impressed with my crisis management and technical expertise that he'd been hoping to poach me for months. We've been watching your work for years, he told me during the interview. Frankly, we were surprised you stayed at your father's company as long as you did. Your skills are wasted there. My new salary was 40% higher than what Dad had been paying me, plus equity and actual respect for my contributions. My new boss actually valued competence over genetics, and my salary reflected that. Meanwhile, cracks were already showing in Dad's perfect vision of post-me operations. The first sign came 2 weeks after I left when the Patterson Group called to complain about delays in their project timeline. My brother had confidently promised them completion dates that ignored the complexity of their requirements. When Patterson threatened to impose penalty fees for late delivery, my brother panicked and tried to throw the project team under the bus. The team, however, had been documenting everything since my departure, and they had emails proving my brother had ignored their warnings about unrealistic deadlines. The first client complaint arrived within 2 weeks, and my brother had no idea how to handle it. Uncle Robert called me 3 weeks after my last day, his voice heavy with concern about what he'd witnessed at the family business. Your dad made a huge mistake, he said without preamble. I've been watching what's happening over there, and it's not pretty. Your brother is in way over his head, and your father's too proud to admit they need help. He told me about missed deadlines, confused clients, and employees starting to polish their resumes as the workplace culture deteriorated without someone competent managing the day-to-day operations. Your dad made a huge mistake, Uncle Robert said, and everyone can see it except him. 3 months after my departure, my brother was failing spectacularly at everything I used to handle with ease. The Hendricks Corporation project, a routine system upgrade that should have been finished in 6 weeks, was now 3 months behind schedule and completely over budget. My brother had promised them features our software couldn't deliver, ignored compatibility issues I'd flagged years earlier, and somehow managed to delete 2 weeks of work by clicking the wrong button during a client presentation. When Hendricks threatened to sue for breach of contract, my brother's solution was to blame our development team for sabotaging his leadership, the same team that had been warning him about problems he refused to acknowledge. My golden child brother was failing at everything I used to handle effortlessly, and everyone could see it. The employee exodus started with our best project manager, Sarah, who'd been with the company for 8 years. She told me later that my brother had accused her of loyalty issues when she suggested following the documented procedures I'd established for quality control. He doesn't want systems, she said during our coffee meeting. He wants yes men who'll tell him his bad ideas are brilliant. I'm not going to tank my reputation covering for someone who thinks expertise is a threat to his authority. Within 6 weeks, we'd lost Sarah, our lead developer, Tom, and 3 junior staff members who'd rather find new jobs than watch their professional credibility get destroyed by association with incompetent leadership. The best employees started jumping ship rather than watch their careers sink with my brother's management. The financial crisis hit when our cash flow dropped 40% in a single quarter. 2 major clients had terminated their contracts early rather than deal with my brother's chaotic project management. The Nelson Group had actually demanded a refund for work they considered unprofessional and incomplete. Dad was finally forced to look at the numbers instead of just listening to my brother's excuses about market downturns and unreasonable client expectations. Revenue was down, expenses were up due to project overruns, and their credit line was getting stretched thin, covering operational costs that should have been covered by completed contracts. Revenue dropped 40% in 6 months, and Dad finally had to face the numbers. My inside information came from Jared, my former colleague who'd stayed behind, but kept me updated on the beautiful disaster unfolding at my old workplace. According to him, my brother spent most of his time blaming everyone else for problems that stemmed directly from his incompetence and arrogance. He actually told a client yesterday that their specifications were impossible for our industry standards. Jared texted me. These were the same specs you handled for them last year without breaking a sweat. The client asked where you were, and your brother said you'd been holding the company back with outdated methods. Jared's daily updates painted a picture of systematic collapse accelerating with each passing week. Jared kept me updated on the beautiful disaster, and it was more spectacular than I'd even imagined. 6 months after my departure, the full scope of the company's collapse became undeniably clear through the metrics that Dad could no longer ignore or spin. Revenue had dropped from $12 million annually to $7.2 million. They'd lost 8 major clients, including 3 that had been with the company for over a decade. Employee turnover hit 60% as competent staff fled rather than have their professional reputations destroyed by association. The Morrison account, the same one I'd saved right before my resignation, had terminated their 3-year extension after my brother missed 4 consecutive project milestones. Their parting email was particularly brutal. We contracted for professional expertise, not amateur hour management that disrespects our timeline and budget constraints. Everything I'd built over 15 years was crumbling without the foundation I'd provided, and the numbers made it impossible to pretend otherwise. My brother's response to the mounting failures was a masterclass in deflecting responsibility and blaming everyone except the person actually making the decisions. According to Jared's increasingly frequent updates, he'd blamed the economy, unrealistic client expectations, disloyal employees, outdated software, and even me for sabotaging company culture before I left. He actually told Dad yesterday that you'd poisoned the well by making clients too dependent on your personal involvement, Jared texted. Said the business would be healthier once clients learned to work with normal professional standards instead of expecting unrealistic hand-holding. The golden child was blaming everyone except the mirror, including me, for being too competent at my job. Dad's desperate attempts to stop the bleeding without admitting his fundamental error were almost comical to watch from the outside. He hired 3 different consulting firms to analyze their market positioning challenges. He borrowed against company assets to fund a marketing campaign that promised renewed excellence and fresh leadership vision. When that didn't work, he tried cutting costs by eliminating the quality assurance department and reducing project timelines even further. The predictable result was even more client complaints and contract terminations as rushed projects failed basic competency standards. Dad tried everything except admitting he was wrong about which son actually ran his company. While my family's business was imploding, my career was reaching new heights that proved my value had been severely underestimated by people who should have known better. Morrison Industries promoted me to Director of Operations after just 4 months, specifically citing my ability to manage complex projects and maintain client relationships under pressure. Industry publications started featuring my work on systems integration and crisis management. I was invited to speak at 3 conferences about best practices in client relationship management. Headhunters called weekly with offers from competitors who'd heard about my track record. I was succeeding exactly where competence was valued over family politics and genetic lottery wins. The most damning evidence of my irreplaceable value came from comparing the company's performance metrics before and after my departure. Client satisfaction scores had dropped from 94% to 67%. Project completion rates fell from 98% on-time delivery to 53%. Employee satisfaction surveys showed morale had plummeted as workplace stress increased under chaotic management. Even more telling were the client exit interviews that Jared managed to share with me. Every departing client mentioned missing the previous project manager who actually understood our needs and expressing disappointment that their reliable contact person was no longer available. The numbers proved exactly what I'd been worth, and the contrast couldn't have been more devastating to my family's narrative about my expendability. The first desperate contact came 8 months after I'd walked away, disguised as a casual, "How are you doing?" call from my brother that fooled absolutely no one. His voice had that forced casualness of someone trying to appear nonchalant while their house was literally burning down behind them. "Hey, just checking in," he said, like we'd been having regular brotherly conversations instead of radio silence since my resignation. "Dad mentioned you're doing well at your new place." "That's great, really great. We're doing fine too, just, different approaches and all." The subtext was so obvious it was practically screaming they needed help and were testing the waters to see if I'd be receptive to crawling back. The first friendly call came after 8 months and desperation was practically dripping through the phone. 2 weeks later, my brother tried a more direct approach that revealed just how far their situation had deteriorated. He actually showed up at my office building, apparently having gotten my location from someone in our extended family network. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot," he said, his usual arrogance replaced by something uncomfortably close to pleading. "Family should stick together, right? Dad's been thinking that maybe there's room for collaboration, bringing different strengths to the table." His attempt to frame this as mutual benefit rather than desperate need was almost insulting to my intelligence. "Family should stick together," my brother said desperately, like he'd just discovered what family meant after 8 months. Dad's approach was more subtle but equally transparent. Instead of calling me directly, he started reaching out through intermediaries. Uncle Robert, family friends, even our old accountant, dropping hints about how much they valued my unique contributions and how the company had evolved since my departure. The message was always the same. They missed my expertise but were too proud to admit they'd made a catastrophic error in letting me go. Every conversation included variations of, "Maybe there's a way to bring fresh energy back to the company," or "Your father has been reflecting on different management approaches." Dad was too proud to ask directly for help, so he sent everyone else to test the waters for him. Finally, after 9 months of their situation continuing to deteriorate, Dad swallowed enough pride to make direct contact. The call came on a Friday afternoon, his voice carrying none of the dismissive confidence he'd shown when calling me a glorified temp worker. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "There might be opportunities for you to consult with us on some strategic initiatives. Could you meet with us next week to discuss some possibilities?" Even in desperation, he couldn't bring himself to say, "We made a mistake," or "We need your help." It was all couched in business language that pretended this was a professional opportunity rather than a family crisis. "We need to talk," Dad finally said, and those 4 words carried the weight of 9 months of failure. The meeting they'd requested took place in my new office, a detail that wasn't lost on anyone involved. They walked into my director-level suite at Morrison Industries, taking in the industry awards on my walls, the panoramic city view, and the general atmosphere of success that surrounded someone who was actually valued for their competence. Dad's eyes lingered on my Director of Operations nameplate and the framed client testimonials praising my exceptional crisis management and irreplaceable expertise. I could see him calculating exactly how much I was earning in a role that recognized my actual worth, probably double what he'd been paying his glorified temp worker. They came to my office like supplicants visiting a king they'd once banished, and the reversal of power was absolutely delicious. Dad's attempt to maintain dignity while essentially begging for help was excruciating to watch. He sat across from my mahogany desk, the same man who'd dismissed 15 years of my work with a casual insult, trying to frame their spectacular failure as a mutual business opportunity. "We've been doing some strategic evaluation of our operational structure," he said, his voice lacking any of the authority it once carried. "The company's at a critical juncture, and frankly, your specialized experience could be invaluable in a senior consulting capacity. We're thinking a partnership arrangement where you'd have complete autonomy over project management and client relations. Translation, please come back and save us from the disaster we created when we fired the only competent person in the building." The same man who'd called me a glorified temp worker was now describing my skills as invaluable and specialized. "We need you back," Dad finally admitted without meeting my eyes, and the desperation in his voice was music to my ears. My brother's performance was even more pathetic than Dad's barely concealed panic. The arrogant smirk that had accompanied his "understand your place" comment was completely gone, replaced by desperate attempts to rewrite history and pretend our entire relationship had been one big misunderstanding. "I've been thinking a lot about our communication challenges," he stammered, his hands trembling slightly as he shuffled through papers he clearly wasn't reading. "You know, different leadership philosophies can sometimes create friction, but that doesn't mean we can't find common ground." The same person who'd grinned while watching Dad humiliate me was now claiming we'd had communication challenges rather than systematic dismissal of my expertise. "The truth is, I think we could really benefit from your operational insights," he continued, each word clearly causing him physical pain. "You always had a good grasp of the technical details, and maybe I was too focused on big picture strategy to appreciate that. Where family and family businesses work best when everyone's strengths are utilized." He actually used the word utilize when talking about bringing back someone he'd considered disposable just months earlier. The golden child was literally begging the glorified temp worker for salvation, and watching him grovel was better than any revenge I could have planned. My response was everything I'd been mentally rehearsing for 9 months, delivered with the calm professionalism that had made me indispensable to my new employer and apparently irreplaceable to my old one. "I genuinely appreciate you both coming here today," I said, leaning back in my executive chair with the kind of relaxed confidence that comes from being genuinely valued. "And I want you to know that I absolutely did help the family business. In fact, I helped it more than you could possibly imagine. I let them think for just a moment that reconciliation might be possible, watching hope flicker in their desperate eyes. I helped by leaving," I continued with a warm smile. "You specifically wanted to see what the company could accomplish without the glorified temp worker holding you back with his outdated methods and constant interference. Well, congratulations. The experiment was a complete success. You got exactly what you asked for, and now you have definitive proof of what I was actually worth." "I did help," I said calmly. "I helped by leaving and letting you discover the difference between a glorified temp worker and irreplaceable expertise." The final devastating piece of evidence came from an email chain that perfectly illustrated the difference between family politics and professional respect. In his desperation, Dad had actually contacted my current boss to try discrediting me, apparently hoping to force me back by damaging my new career. Jared had forwarded me the screenshot of Dad's pathetic attempt. "We're concerned about my name's work ethic and loyalty issues. He left our family business abruptly and may not be reliable for long-term commitments." My boss's reply was a masterpiece of professional dismissal. "He's irreplaceable here, consistently exceeds expectations, and we're grateful you were short-sighted enough to let him go. Please don't contact us again." That email was now framed on my wall as a permanent reminder of the difference between earned respect and inherited entitlement. My boss's reply was perfection. "He's irreplaceable, and we're grateful you were short-sighted enough to let him go." "I think our meeting is concluded," I said, standing up and walking toward the door with the authority of someone who'd finally found his proper place in the world. "Security will escort you out. I hope this experience has taught you something valuable about the difference between a glorified temp worker and the person who is actually running your company." The look of complete devastation on their faces as building security escorted the former family business owners from my office was worth every moment of 15 years under appreciation. Security will show you out, I said with genuine satisfaction, watching the glorified temp worker permanently dismiss his former employers. The final collapse of Dad's company was swift and inevitable once they'd burned their last bridge with me. Within 6 months of that meeting, they'd filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The business that had taken my father 30 years to build crumbled in less than 18 months without the foundation I'd provided. My brother's incompetence had finally caught up with reality in ways that couldn't be spun or blamed on market conditions. Their remaining clients fled to competitors who could actually deliver professional results. Key employees took their institutional knowledge to companies that valued competence over family connections. Dad's company filed for bankruptcy within 6 months, and my brother learned that golden child status doesn't pay the bills. Meanwhile, my career continued reaching heights that proved exactly what I'd been worth all along. Morrison Industries promoted me to Vice President of Strategic Operations, specifically citing my ability to turn around failing projects and build lasting client relationships. Industry publications featured my crisis management methodologies. Competitors tried to poach me monthly with offers that would have made Dad's jaw drop. The difference between working for people who valued merit versus genetics was transformative in ways I'd never fully appreciated while trapped in their dysfunctional system. I was promoted to VP while they lost everything, proving the glorified temp worker had been worth more than they ever imagined. Looking back, the most satisfying part wasn't watching their business collapse. It was building something better without their limitations holding me back. I'd spent 15 years trying to earn respect from people who were fundamentally incapable of recognizing competence when it didn't match their preconceived notions about hierarchy and worth. Some families celebrate their members' talents, others punish them. I'd finally learned the difference between the family you're born into and the professional family that actually values what you bring to the table. Turns out the glorified temp worker was worth more than the golden child ever dreamed, and everyone knew it now.